Thank you for giving me the opportunity to testify on behalf of 7112, a product of hundreds of hours of collaborative work with Representative Turco, Representative Sims, the Office of the Speaker of the House, and the Majority Leader in his office, and the outstanding leadership of this committee. I'd like to focus my testimony on Section 1 and what I hope it will ultimately become as part of this bill. It's an idea I developed over the summer while I was recovering from kidney cancer, which I have dubbed Propel CT. What is Propel CT? It stands for Providing Real Opportunity Purchasing Existing Listings. Before I explain how Propel CT works, let me just review the problem. We're short between 90,000 and 140,000 affordable housing units. The cost to produce each unit, according to CHFA and DOH, is $300,000 to $500,000 per unit. That means to solve our affordable housing shortage in the state, we would need between $30 and $50 billion. Obviously, we don't have $30 or $50 billion. So we need to think outside the box. We need creative new ideas that will more rapidly and more affordably produce real deed-restricted affordable housing. That's where Propel CT comes in. Here's how it works. State of Connecticut changes a few words in state statute to turn on a long since dormant housing authority that used to be embedded in CHFA and existed throughout much of the 1900s. That housing authority is given a board of experts, real estate investing experts, homelessness experts, nonprofit expertise, fiduciary expertise, property management expertise. The state treasurer probably sits on that board, and any other experts that this committee thinks are relevant. The New Again Housing Authority at CHFA, Propel CT, acts like an affordable housing real estate investment trust, is seeded with $25 million in one-time bond allocation, and it goes out and it buys residential real estate all over the state, leases it to tenants that qualify for affordable housing. They have a RAP certificate or a Section 8 voucher, manages the fund, and the rents recapitalize the fund so that it can buy more units, deed restrict them affordable, and continue to do good. It's sort of like a cross between a social benefit corporation and a real estate investment trust. The money it's earning means it can do more good and deed restrict more units for the state. There's a lot of benefits to this innovative proposal. It costs significantly less per unit. You can buy an existing housing unit in Connecticut, in some cases for $10,000 or less down, and use CHFA or bank financing. So compare that to the $300,000 to $500,000 a unit we spend when we build. It's better for the environment because we're dealing with existing stock as opposed to the damage we do to the environment when we have to build new. It outsmarts the NIMBYs, right? If I want to build 1,000 affordable unit complex in Greenwich today, I'm going to face many, many years of battles, legal battles, zoning challenges, and exclusionary and in some cases racist response to that. But if Propel CT goes to buy a little one-bedroom apartment in Greenwich, there's no mechanism for a NIMBY to stop them. And that property can be deed restricted affordable immediately and help provide opportunity where before there was none.
Representative Luxenberg, your time has expired. If you could please
summarize.
Yeah,
no problem. This idea already exists in two different ways. There are already affordable housing REITs in the marketplace that earn investors an 8 to 10% return. So investors today make money investing in affordable housing REITs. They're doing a good thing and they're making money. So that idea already exists. And housing authorities doing this type of work already exists in Maryland. So this idea is sort of a hybrid of two things that are already working really well and harnessing those two things for the benefit of Connecticut. So I'll stop there. I don't want to run afoul of the sensitive time commitments of the committee, but I guess I'll, with the chair's indulgence, open it up to any questions people might have.
Thank you, Representative. Any questions? Representative Scott.
Former Chairman Luxenberg of the Housing Committee. How are you doing?
I'm doing great. It's wonderful to be here.
Thank you for coming back and visiting us. I do want to question one number, and then we'll get into the details of it. the $300,000 number to $500,000. In my mind, you say it costs about $300,000 to $500,000 to build one unit of affordable housing.
Yeah.
I'm not questioning you. Where does that number come from? Because I can think about going to build a house for $500,000,
Yeah.
a 3-bedroom, 2,500 square foot house for $300,000, $500,000. And you're telling me one affordable unit. It sounds like something's out of whack. So can you please tell me where that number's coming from?
Yeah, so I mean, I think those numbers come from analysis from I think CHFA has at certain point put sort of a rough cost on what it costs when they lend on an affordable unit, but I think DOH also has some numbers, and I think some of the advocacy groups have some numbers. So 300,000 to 500,000 is sort of the range of what it costs to build an affordable unit in Connecticut. The reasons why it's so expensive are you've got exorbitant land costs, you've got costly litigation, you've got expensive labor, you've got expensive lumber and materials. A lot of the things that make housing production very expensive in Connecticut, we also hope to address in this bill and other sections of the bill. And actually, the Housing Committee has some great proposals that you're working on to drive down the cost, to try to get that cost down. But needless to say, Representative Scott, it's a lot of money per unit. And because it's a lot of money per unit, and we don't have unlimited resources as a state of Connecticut, I think we need other creative ways to partner with the production. I'm not saying we don't need to build. We absolutely need to build. But we just need other ideas that will also help us get more affordable units more quickly, because people are really, really suffering right now.
Thank you. The Affordable Housing Real Estate Investment Trust.
Yeah.
That's what you're thinking about. So does that exist already? If it does exist, okay. But if it didn't exist and it went away, why did it exist before it went away?
Yeah, so there are affordable housing real estate investment trusts that exist all over the country and do lots of real estate, both building and acquiring of existing real estate. They rent to people who qualify for affordable housing. They make a big difference in terms of societal impact, and they pay investors a great return. So that already exists. This hasn't existed at CHFA or in the state of Connecticut in the form that I envision this that I'm calling Propel CT. The CHFA did, for many years throughout the 90s, have a housing authority. And so I'm seeking to just turn that housing authority back on and use that as the vehicle. Housing authorities across the country can do this. And to maybe more clearly answer your question, there is a housing authority in Maryland that is currently doing something somewhat similar, which is they are lending money, as I understand it, to a developer. Developer builds a lot of affordable housing, pays the housing authority back, and the housing authority retains ownership of all those affordable units. So once they're rented, the housing authority is collecting the rent, and that rent is then recapitalizing that housing authority's ability to do more, to go out and build more affordable housing. So this idea is sort of combining what that housing authority is very brilliantly doing in Maryland with what already exists in the capital marketplace, which is affordable housing real estate investment trusts, combining the best parts of both ideas and bringing it to Connecticut.
I do have a couple more questions, but I'll defer to the chairs and see if anyone else has questions, and they'll circle back to me. Thank you.
Sure, yeah. Thank you for the good question.
Representative Butler.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And Representative Luxenberg, it's great to see you. You know, I think this is a great proposal, and it goes to show that you probably shouldn't have left the Housing Committee.
Thank you.
I just wanted to ask you a couple questions relative to this. You mentioned Maryland and how they actually utilize this concept, and it speaks that to the success they've had. Could you give us any metrics or numbers in terms of how they've been successful and what the cost per unit that they've been able to utilize to produce the housing?
Yeah, that's a thank you, Representative Butler. That's a great question. I think in Maryland they're at sort of the beginning the beginning stage. So I don't know that the metrics exist yet to measure Maryland. As I understand what they're doing in Maryland is that, they've got a private developer that's building like a big complex, like a lot of units, and they're probably achieving maybe a lower per unit cost than we do, because they're achieving some economies of scale because they're doing like a lot in one place. So they're getting some cost cutting there. But that model's still more expensive than what I envision here, because they've got all the building costs. The way what they're doing is similar to what I'm proposing is, after they spend all that money, and they're spending way more per unit there than my idea here suggests, they benefit from being able to collect the rents, right? Those are, once it's done, potentially those are all cash flow positive units. And so even if they're spending a lot to build in Maryland, once they've spent it and once it's built, they get the benefit of owning it. And because they get the benefit of owning it, they get all that rental income, which allows them to then, in their case, build more affordable housing. So I think the jury's still out a little bit in Maryland. It's a new idea, but the New York Times was certainly excited about it.
Well, thank you. And my second question is, how would this concept actually leverage existing federal and state resources? How does that combination work within this framework?
Yeah, that's a great question. I really appreciate it. So right now, the federal government spends a fortune on Section 8 vouchers to housing authorities in Connecticut, to DOH, and across the country. And then the state of Connecticut, on top of that, spends a lot of money on RAP certificates. And I'm glad that the federal government does that. I hope they continue to. And I'm glad that the state of Connecticut does that, because these vouchers and RAP certificates are life-saving for individuals and families that get one. Life-saving, vital, but very expensive. Today, what happens with those vouchers and RAP certificates is somebody searches for a private landlord over and over and over again. Please give me housing. And in many cases, they're rejected over and over and over and over and over again. And upon being rejected but eventually they find someone. And so the monthly payments every month to house that person goes to a private landlord. This proposal starts to shift some of that money that's already being spent. Federal government's already paid for the RAP, for the Section 8 voucher. State of Connecticut's already paid for the RAP certificate. But instead of all the money going to the private landlord who owns the housing unit that person's being housed in, it's now going to Propel CT. And Propel CT can use it to buy more units and create more affordability, whereas the private landlord uses it and does whatever they want with it. Let me be clear. I don't oppose private landlords making money and housing people who need affordable housing. I do it as a private landlord myself. I think it's good when landlords actually accept people that have RAP certificates and Section 8 vouchers. But there's no reason that Connecticut can't capitalize on those federal dollars and turn it into more affordable housing instead of solely enriching private landlords. And that's how this leverages existing federal and state funds. I hope I answered your question, but...
Yes, you did, and thank you for explaining it. I have a much clearer picture of this now. And Mr. Chair, thank you for allowing me to ask my questions.
Thank you, Representative Butler, and I won't take the preface to your first question to heart. Representative Turco.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Representative, thank you so much for coming in front of us with this really innovative, unique proposal here to solve a very, very complicated problem, as you mentioned, with 100,000 or more units that we need in the state. And I apologize if you already said this, because you've given us a lot of good information, but once this program is up and running, how many units annually you think could be purchased and then reserved for affordable housing?
Gosh, that's a great question. I wish I had a crystal ball and knew. I think, right, if you look at any point right now in the real estate market, like how many houses are even on the market? How many apartment buildings or condos or multifamilies or single families? There's only, I think maybe somewhere, but at this snapshot in time, maybe like there's 3,000 to 5,000 units on the market at any given time. And that speaks to our larger supply-demand challenges in the housing market. And it's why this is not a silver bullet solution. This is a solution in tandem with building more housing, which the committee is doing great work on. But I think it can buy units that are on the market, but it could also buy units that it finds out about that never hit the market, just like people do every day. And so I think it could acquire potentially thousands of units in a year. And then once it's making money, the housing market might also change over time. Right now, there's not a lot of inventory potentially for this to buy, but housing markets change, and before you know it, there could be lots of inventory that's affordable where this entity could come in and buy a lot of units. So to give a rough estimate, I think it would be a good goal if it purchased 1,000 units in 1 year and deed restricted them all, and we got 1,000 deed restricted units out of existing stock in year one. I think that would be a home run. And it could grow on itself.
No, thank you for that, and I'm glad you mentioned that this is one part of a solution, but building more housing is going to be needed as well. I like how you mentioned, though, too, that something I didn't think about, if this program exists and there are people that want to sell their home, they know they can go to this entity directly, have a seamless, maybe more cost-effective, maybe not, no offense to real estate agents, not even need a real estate agent, sell the
100%.
property, and do good by this property now being deeded as affordable. So that could be a way of, like you said, getting a lot more houses part of the program that aren't even available right now if you went onto Zillow. One other thing I wanted to ask you, I know you mentioned it's important for the revenue from the rents to go back into the program to then be, self-sustaining. But could you see in the future any part of this program being a rent-to-own concept? And that money generated could then, from the sale, could also go into.
You know what? What a great question. There are some really innovative things out there. I was just reading about one in the private sector where people invest in housing and they take tenants in, and the tenants actually, there's one model where the tenants, when they pay their portion of the rent on time, or if their portion is the entire rent, they pay on time, and they are essentially are good. There's some metrics for being a good tenant, that they actually start to get credits that are like set aside for them for the future, for them to then be able to buy either the unit they live in or another unit. And so this vehicle had, because I envision it in CHFA, which is a quasi-public, I think we'll have the flexibility to do exactly what you're talking about, to also at some point create opportunities from people to move from tenancy to ownership, which is really important for dealing with the wealth gap and a number of things. So the short answer, yes, this structure within a housing authority, within CHFA, allows for the flexibility to do that, and I think it should do that in out years, absolutely.
Thank you very much, Representative, and thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Representative Turco. Anybody else for the first time? I would like to ask, who pays the taxes on these properties?
Yeah, that's a great question. So the fund actually pays it, and that's one of the benefits to this idea, is that the municipality is not going to lose a dime in property tax. I mean, because one of the concerns is you're going to go out and buy units and then deed restrict them affordable. You got to worry about our cities and towns saying, hey, wait a second, you just took that off the property tax rolls. We maybe don't want that. So the idea is that after this fund has paid the property taxes, the mortgage, the maintenance issues, any renovation costs, the lending costs, all the costs of ownership, in many cases with these Section 8 and RAP programs, if this is done right, there is still profit left over for the fund after it's paid the taxes and everything else to recapitalize itself to do more. So the benefit of this is no property tax hit to our cities and towns, none, but real permanent affordability for them.
But through this fund and the state would be paying the property taxes, is what you're saying?
Well, the fund would be essentially be paying the property taxes. Yes.
Right. So
but
it would pay the property taxes up front, but once this fund is self-sustaining, the state would no longer be paying the taxes, right?
yeah. So I guess what I would say is when the fund acquires ownership of a property and deed restricts it affordable, it takes on all the costs of that property, including the property taxes. But it's also immediately getting the rental income. So instead of the rental income going to a private landlord, it's going to that fund. And it is my view that the rental income will exceed the cost of those property taxes. So in a way, you could say it's this quasi-public, this housing authority under CHFA is paying the property taxes. And that's, being capitalized with an initial state investment. Yes. But really over time, it's really, I would argue the federal government is paying the property taxes to our municipality, right? The federal government's the one paying for the Section 8 voucher that's being used to cover all the costs, including taxes. So from my view, how great is it if we're leveraging federal resources and saying, thanks, federal government, you're gonna pay the property taxes on this unit, and the municipality in Connecticut are whole. How great is that?
Thank you. Representative Scott for the second time.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So my question is, and I'm not a housing provider, so I don't know 100% how this works, but from a state standpoint, you rent a property and you have to claim that on your taxes. That you sold it, you rented it for $1,500 or $2,000 a month.
Yeah.
Then you got to pay taxes towards that. In this scenario, it's going to be affordable housing, 100% affordable housing. Is that correct?
Great question.
My question is yes or no, is it 100% affordable housing?
I would love the committee's input on that question. I think that's an open question in this proposal. I will say that in my meetings with CHFA, they expressed interest, for example, in could this fund purchase a 3-family house, right? And 2 of the 3 units maybe are market rate, and 1 is deed restricted affordable. They asked me, could this fund do that? And they seemed interested maybe in potentially doing that. And I thought yes, because it's still going from a 3-family house where none of the 3 units were affordable to now having 1 out of 3 affordable. So I'm open to the policy prerogatives of this committee as to how they want to handle that. But my initial answer would be it wouldn't have to be 100% affordable. It could have the flexibility to buy a 3-family and deed restrict one of the apartments affordable and leave the other 2 market rate so that it can make money and create more affordable housing.
Yeah, and I think from a local municipality standpoint, the taxes might be good, but I do worry if you have 1,000 units and on average they're rented at $2,000 a month, and now it's affordable and it's down to $1,000 a month. I don't see how the state's getting made whole in terms of the taxes that's going to be from the generation of the revenue for that individual company that was previously managing that property. Then now it's the state and it's only at 1,000. So I don't think, unless you could tell me opposite, the math would work out for the state. It might work out for the property if the value didn't go down any because of now being only affordable.
I think I can answer that if it.
Yeah.
Yeah. So right now, if a private landlord owns a condo and the fair market rent is $2,000 a month, and that condo owner makes money renting it out for $2,000 a month after they pay all their expenses, and it's lucrative for that condo owner. If this fund, Propel CT, buys that condo, they, in most cases, will be able to also rent it for $2,000 a month because Section 8 and RAP will pay fair market rents for what the fair market rent is zip code. So in most scenarios, the rental income will actually not go down. But the difference is, perhaps, before Propel CT buys this unit, it's a private landlord renting it to a private marketplace tenant who can afford $2,000 a month themselves. So that's not that's a person that's got some resources. But once Propel CT owns it, now it's rented to somebody with a RAP certificate or a Section 8 voucher. Now you're creating affordability in a unit where that affordability opportunity didn't exist before. Did that answer your question a little bit? There might be some loss to your point, and I think it's a fair point you've raised, Representative
Yeah,
Scott.
no, I appreciate it. And that goes back to the 100% versus not 100%. So I appreciate that. And I was just put on the record, and like we need to look into that and potentially make sure that while the municipalities might be fine, the state might not be 100%. What would you classify this trust as being? Is it quasi-public? Like, what would your classification be, or what would the classification be of this? Because I'm going to get you, so that piece, and then who has the oversight, and who does the auditing of all these dollars? Like, who sees that and makes sure that's running properly? Because if it's Chaffa, or is it Department of Housing, or who it might be, depending on what classification it is.
Yeah, so my thinking is that it's essentially a housing authority, because housing authorities, as I understand it, the way they're constituted, they have the flexibility to do everything that I've described already. So that's already sort of a relatively flexible vehicle that has a public good mission. And there used to be this housing authority in CHFA. So it's very easy to just turn back on something that was turned off. So I'd envision a housing authority. In terms of the oversight, I think I'd like to look to the wisdom of this committee for their advice on that. My vision was that it would be managed by experts from all of the relevant areas of expertise that are needed. So, I could envision even the legislature potentially having seats on the entity that's managing this. Perhaps, certainly the state treasurer is one that logically comes to mind. He's already responsible for $50 billion in state pension funds to sort of make sure the fiduciary side of it is being managed properly. But I also think you need people that are in charge, that are appointed from an oversight perspective, that are making sure like things like tenants are being treated fairly, that the properties are safe, right? That there are safety inspections, right? So I could envision potentially an oversight role for DOH, potentially CHFA, potentially legislature, but I think that's an open question. This is a new idea, and I'd love your input and thoughts on how to structure it so that the oversight achieves both goals, that it makes money for itself to do more good, but also that its processes are efficient and effective and that tenants are being treated fairly.
Thank you.
Maybe a landlord and tenant advocate each on the board as well, frankly. I don't know.
Thank you, Representative. One more question to follow up on that, because you're talking about all these possibilities of folks overseeing this.
Yeah.
Who oversees it in Maryland?
That's a good question. In Maryland, it's a housing authority that's building the units, borrowing, and then keeping ownership and collecting the rents. I think the housing authority it's probably a Department of Housing in Maryland, I would imagine.
Is that a housing authority that was already established, or was it established as?
I think
the entity.
You know what?
For
I'll look more carefully at the Office of Legislative Research's report on this, which they did, which was wonderful. Shout out to them for doing great research on this idea. By the way, they did an outstanding job. But I will look more into that. I believe the housing authority already existed, and just realized that they wanted to be. I presume they realized that they were tired of constantly spending money and never getting any back to do more good, and they decided, let's just get into the ownership game ourselves. So I think they're probably regulated by the Department of Housing in Maryland, but let me research that and get back to the committee with that answer. It's a really great question, Mr.
Thank
Chair.
you. Appreciate that. And seeing no other questions from members, thank you for your time. We appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.